Well, ladies and gentlemen, um, we're going to talk a little bit and have a discussion because there are no slides. That'll frighten the
Right.
hell out of you.
No, that's all good.
About inflation. And for those who missed the news tonight, um, the last month of inflation is actually slowly trending down. We're down to
Only in non-essentials.
yes. We'll go through that. Down to 6.8.
Yeah.
But it's a kind of uh, artificial number, inflation.
Yeah.
What the Bureau of Statistics has done is chosen a a broad range of goods and services
Yeah.
to measure the cost of living in the country.
Yeah.
Now, depending on what's in and what's out, you don't necessarily get as accurate a number as one may like.
Mhm.
Um,
I'm
and
definitely back in a minute, Peter. I've got
you
to
go
go.
make your wife a cup of tea.
Yeah,
You're
that's right.
fine.
Yeah.
Okay. The the real thing about inflation is that a rise in prices, which can be translated as the decline of purchasing power over time. And this, of course, is the sting in the tail of inflation, is that as inflation goes up, what you can actually afford to buy or what you can buy actually goes down. And I'll talk about uh, a number of aspects of inflation. And firstly, I think it's important to know that inflation isn't really bad. We really do need to have some inflation. The point is that we don't want too much. So without inflation, um, businesses wouldn't make profits, good profits, and therefore put money into development, research, new products, whatever else we needed. If uh, prices always remained the same, they wouldn't get the opportunity to have additional revenue to do the things that businesses would want to do. Now, the converse is deflation. Deflation is as bad as inflation, mainly because if prices go down, it gets to be a point where businesses become non-viable. And let me give you an analogy. If we considered that inflation was like fire, um, keep it under control, and it can heat us, cook our food, do lots of things for us that are good. Let it get out of control, you get wildfire, that may end up killing you. So, in real terms, what we are looking at is something that will always be with us, is sometimes good, is sometimes bad, but it is something that is a normal part of the economy, which we've joined into. And I'll explain that a little bit more as I go along before I get to the discussion bit. He turns his page. Okay, most households have a nominal income. You fill this in usually in your tax, which I completed mine yesterday. I feel very proud of myself that I finally did it after going through countless pieces of paper. But let me say this: a household's nominal income, which they receive in current money, does not increase as much as prices. They are worse off because they can afford to purchase less. And that's the whole thing about inflation. And we'll talk about that and its issue when I get to that part. I'll give you an example. The humble cup of coffee, I'm sure many of you have bought one. 19 cent in 1970, according to Investopedia, a cup of coffee cost 25 cents.
Wow.
In 1980, it cost 45. In 1990, it cost 75. In the year 2000, a whole dollar. In 2010, $1.25. And in 2022, instead of going to $1.50, has gone to $1.85. Now, this is all the result of inflation. And you may ask me, what creates inflation? And there's no one answer to this because inflation comes in a number of forms. And I'll talk about that a little bit. Maybe my friend, Mr. Putin, this time is a major factor in why we have so much inflation. And inflation is really the perfect strategy for fear and greed. Have you all noticed how wonderful the profits are in some industries at the moment? The oil companies are going gangbusters. They're having a lovely time.
How about the banks?
I was getting to them. Did you hear on the news? One of the branches of the ANZ Bank is no longer accepting cash.
No, I didn't hear that.
Outrageous. They cut their services, and it's all one thing. It's all greed. It absolutely is. The supermarkets have put up their prices. The insurance companies are making outrageous profits. The list goes on. And what happens is they all see it as a means of putting up their prices and getting away with it. And I just think that our toothless tiger that is supposed to regulate industry is bloody useless. There's several reasons why we get inflation, apart from Mr. Putin pushing up the cost of oil because of supply and demand problems and a war that he thinks he should have. I wonder what the reason is for the war in Ukraine. Is it about territory? Is it about creating problems in world economies? I have my doubts about all those things. But long-lasting episodes of high inflation are often the result of lax monetary policy. If the money supply grows too big relative to the size of an economy, the unit value of the currency diminishes. In other words, the purchasing power falls and prices rise.
Yeah.
And if you look at countries like Africa, Namibia, Ethiopia, and many others, where inflation is about 1,000%, this is a result of them printing more money, having no backing for it, and consequently their currency is absolutely worthless on the world market. And the relationship between money supply and the size of the economy is called quantity theory of money. And it's one of the oldest hypotheses in economics. And I've never been big on economists, but never mind. This is the other side of it. Pressures on the supply or demand side of the economy can also be inflationary. Supply shocks that disrupt production, such as natural disasters, or raise production costs, such as high oil prices, can reduce overall supply and lead to cost push inflation, in which the impetus for price increases comes from the disruption to supply. Now, if you have all of those things operating negatively, it can be where we see huge pushes coming on in inflation. So three pushes are important to think about. The demand pull, people have got cash. This happened especially after COVID. People have got cash. They didn't spend it in COVID. And now they want to buy things. So there's a demand push. There's a cost push where the cost of production, and if you look in Australia, they keep telling me it's all about not having enough labour or not having enough materials, push up the cost of everything. The cost of building a house has gone up by as much as 20%. Now, how can that be? I mean, is it the cost of the materials? Is it the cost of the labour? Is it the cost of insurances? There are a whole range and raft of issues why it's gone up 20%. Now, the other thing that happens...
Hi, Ian, just a moment. Sorry, hold on.
You're all right there, Moz? Yeah, okay. When prices rise, wages rise too. Now, I'm not sure that that's true. In essence, I've seen higher inflation and I haven't necessarily seen my wages rise. But it does put pressure on your ability to maintain your cost of living. Maybe you've got to cut things a little finer. Maybe instead of going out to dinner 3 times a week, you are happy having a pie at home instead. So there are a whole range and raft of things that are there. The whole thing about inflation is that we are all affected by it. We are all purchasers of goods and services. Therefore, it's always going to be something that is a problem to us. If I think about it, and we look at the Reserve Bank and its attitude by raising interest rates to banks, that's what they do. They change the cost of money to banks. It's like Newton's law. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So the banks have more difficulty. They put up their interest rates, which in turns means that businesses have to pay more for their mortgages. And as people, we have to put up, we get increased mortgages, which means we can purchase less of other goods. And so pulling the levers, which is what it's often termed, ends up being a sledgehammer to crack a nut. So once you get on the slippery slope of inflation, it becomes quite difficult to control, and hence the aggressive role that the Reserve Bank has actually undertaken. I've lived through, and I know a number of you have too, buying houses. We were lucky. We fixed our interest rate at 10%, while other people were paying 18. We were happy paying our 10. Now that I see
there was a cap on some loans of 13.5%, which I had.
Yep.
And there was indexation of wages at that stage. I remember that I never got the same pay twice in 2 pays. It always seemed to go up. And look, it was a great thing if you owed money.
Oh yeah. And look, Hilda and I thought we were lucky having 10%.
Yeah.
And now they're crying. What's it now? About 8 or 9% or something? I don't know what it is.
Yeah, the official rate's about 3.5, Peter, and most people should be on a home loan, especially owner-occupier, that should be either in the high 4.9 something, or maybe in the low 5.0 or 5.1 sort of stage. That's generally what the banks do. And you're right, they're actually crying poor because for a long time, interest rates were very, very low and the cost of money was negligible. So people could overextend themselves. They could invest, and now they're crying poor because it's all sort of gone against them.
Well, I think
Indeed.
the real problem though is the lack of wage rise.
Yeah.
And
that's the thing
and
that's
again,
really
you've got to be careful about wage rise. It's one of those things that actually create inflation.
yeah, but not to
But also don't forget the cost of houses are 10 times more than what you paid and I paid back
yeah,
then.
Clearly.
yeah.
So you've got that problem too.
I remember.
Well,
I remember,
we bought a block of land for 23,000.
yeah.
Yeah.
The same, if not exactly the same, across the other side of the street, 2.5 million without
Yeah.
a house on it.
Yeah. And then you've got the cost of the house. So really the wages have not kept up with the cost of real estate. And that's why the interest rate should be really, really low. But now it's going to hurt everybody. I'd hate to be them today. I hated being when I was there because I bought in 1988 when it was 17% and more interest rates. But, you know, in reality, I should have held off from buying.
Well,
Hey,
you
Peter.
don't know. This is the thing you don't know.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about that a little bit, about when's the right time to do something, when's the right time to make a decision.
Yeah.
And I mean, you can believe that interest rates could start going down by the end of this year. It is possible. Now, the question about it is, how far will it go down?
Yeah.
Will it go down below 1% again? I doubt it.
I doubt it.
I doubt it too. Peter, a question for you. You did mention that your block of land that you bought, you know, however many years ago was 23,000, and the one down the road similar is, you know, 2.5, whatever it was. Do you mind me asking what your salary was when you bought that $23,000 investment?
Yeah.
I absolutely, I can't remember, but there were two of us working.
Yeah.
I might have been getting, I don't know. It was tricky because I was in the IT industry, and like a lot of the early people into IT, my wage people kept throwing money at me. I could never quite understand why. And they'd offer me outrageous sums of money to come and work for them. And eventually I weakened 2 or 3 times. But it always seemed to me that every time I turned around, my wages went up, and they were big rises. I mean, I think one doubled my wage. And I'm sitting there going, yes, that's very nice. And yes, I will take advantage of it.
Yes.
But clearly, and this is, you're right, Michael. It's how the multiples of how many years' salary does it cost to buy the block of land?
Correct.
That's the best way of looking at it, because you can't. And I believe that the multiples have gone out of control.
They have.
They're not.
And back
it's
in
not linear.
time, it would have been about the multiple of 4 to 5 max, whereas now the multiple is like heaps more. Do you know what I mean?
Yep, that's right.
Yeah. You know,
I can remember in mid 1960s, I borrowed $8,000 to build my house. I'd already bought the land, and I thought, how am I ever going to pay this back?
Yeah.
So it's on $2,000 a year. In the end, we were paying it with loose change.
Yeah.
So it was once again multiple of 4, which stayed multiple 4 for many, many, many years.
Yes.
Yeah.
And now, you know, you wouldn't even get multiple of 10 or 20 to cover it.
Yeah,
Yes.
and Peter, going back to your example, where the guy actually bought, you know, whoever it was, the $2.5 million block of land, you know, this person must be on 300,000, 400,000 a year to even contemplate something like that.
No, I don't. I absolutely don't believe so. Mainly because you got to understand what it's driven him to do. instead of building a single dwelling on a block, he had to do a split development. So there are two, they're side-by-side houses on the same block, which cover it almost entirely, almost. And no backyards. That's a thing of the past. And he sold one of them in order to pay for the building of the second one.
Yeah. A lot of people are doing that, subdividing, and
one would have sold for what, 2 million?
It would be close.
So he's paid for the land, and then he'll finance the other build.
Yeah. And look, it's what people have to do. Either that, and they were talking about this, I think, on Sunday night. I can't remember whether it was a political party or a lobbyist was talking about the issue of people moving to the outer suburbs to build the houses they want because it costs too much to buy the land in the middle area of the city. Where, and this is the whole thing about it, where there is infrastructure, where there are services, to move to an outer suburb where the services are somewhat less, maybe a lot less. The infrastructure is poor because it takes years for infrastructure to keep up with the population growth. All those kind of things change the way we live. And in essence, it talks about why cities like Melbourne have spread to as far wide as Melton, to probably Coldstream, to Mornington, to Pakenham and Hallam. And the strange part about it is that's been unbridled too. And some of the best land that we have, that was good farming land, it's just now ploughed into quarter-acre blocks with brick vanillas on them. It's ordinary.
We get to the case where Point Cook, for example, has one road coming out of it.
Correct.
It's just impossible to get in or out of the place.
And one of the people I work with, his daughter recently bought in Clyde North, and apparently there's no mobile phone service there. You need to connect to Wi-Fi to be able to get your mobile phone to work. Now, obviously it's a new development, and in time that problem will be fixed. But when you look at the suburbs that are very, very established, that's completely unthinkable.
Actually, no. You're sure to try my place.
Yeah, why is that? What's happening in Edithvale?
Well, if I relied on the 4G network I'd never take a phone call.
Oh, really? That bad? Oh, jeez.
Mainly the Telstra anyway.
And up the farm, if I go to the second gate in the first paddock and I actually face north east, I can get 1 bar on my mobile phone.
You think we're talking about technology and everything. You'd think we'd be a lot more advanced. But Peter, it comes back to what you said about the greed, the fear and greed part. There's not that much money to make out in the country, near Taggart where you are, and there's no investment because they're not going to get their money back.
Can I tell you? I finally got my landline fixed by Telstra. They tell me it was hit by lightning. And I just smiled when he said that. And I thought, gee, must happen regularly, our lightning storms out there. Anyway, they had to rip up, I don't know how many meters of cable, and how many calls I've made. And the number of people on the landlines out there, we're 6 kilometres from the main road. the number of people on it must be less than 3 or 4, because most of them have gone away from landlines.
Yeah.
And the economics of them doing it for me is outrageous. I would have thought they should just put in my own tower, so I could pick up their damn mobile network. But they've spent the money, and at the moment, this is frightening. The phone works. God, you pick it up and there's no static. I mean, and you can actually hear it ring, and somebody on the other end says hello, hello, and you can actually hear them go hello, hello, instead of the rubbish we put up with for more than 12 months.
Hey, Peter, the fact that they've said it was lightning, are they going towards the act of God clause in your contract?
You know that that's probably what they would like to do, but I think they got sick of me complaining to the ombudsman. I think I'm now a noted pest or something.
Right.
A protected species.
How was the ice cream, Mike? Good. I wished I had one. Yeah, good. Yeah, like good.
Did you hear Joe Biden saying he had lots of ice cream in his fridge instead of thinking of those poor souls that got murdered?
Oh dear. So look, politicians are a weird bunch. If you understand why they're there, you'll understand why we really deserve better. Never mind. Okay. Does anyone know what discretionary spend is?
Yeah.
What is it?
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to Bali this year.
And?
Well, that's a discretionary spend, unless
he doesn't need to spend the money. It's something above and beyond the minimum standard of life, for example. Now, if Ian was going to Bali for, let's say, some medical treatment that he needed, it wouldn't be discretionary spending.
Well, it wouldn't. If I had to go there for business, it wouldn't be either.
Correct.
Right. Okay. Well, it's probably a little more than you think. Okay. You can say things are bad, so I'll cut my morning coffees out.
Yeah.
I won't go and have fast food. We won't eat out. We won't go to Bali.
I wouldn't go to Bali anyway, but that's another matter.
Yeah, and
that's like the point.
And I won't buy my new car.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right.
Now, all those things could be called discretionary because they are not, if I have a car that works, if I've got food, food, clothing, sex and shelter being Maslow's bottom hierarchy of needs. If I've got
Peter, I think a cup of coffee in the morning is down there with it.
Down with what, mate?
With basic food and sex and the requirements.
I see. I'll ring Mr. Maslow, who's probably long dead.
Yeah, absolutely.
And ask him whether he'd like to include coffee. But I do know that there are people that tell me they would die if they didn't have their morning coffee.
And by the way, coffee's about $5 now a cup, not $2.
I think Peter was quoting some stats from the USA. I'd take it that cup of coffee.
Yeah. I'm not.
That was US dollars in the US.
Who was?
And it's a bit doubtful whether you'd call that coffee as well if you've had.
Well, that's true.
In the US.
It was Starbucks.
Oh, come on! Cafe 1 teaspoon.
Occasionally I have a Starbucks coffee just to remind myself how bad it is.
Right. It was Investopedia that gave me those stats. Now, wherever they're from, I didn't bother. I just thought it was fun to talk about it.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, discretionary spend is a lot more than what we've talked about. Right? Let's talk about it in business terms. And this is what could affect us all. When I was at Price Waterhouse, when this is what a term I got from Price Waterhouse. This is what Pricewaterhouse used to talk about in terms of why there was a business downturn in consulting. In real terms, a lot of consulting work is discretionary spend by companies wanting to look for a strategy, a new future, do something different. And it really affects things like them undertaking projects. So during tight times, many businesses tend to shelve projects, stop having consultants come in, and stick largely to their knitting, which means they meet their costs, they meet their wages bill,
Yep.
they meet some return on the business to give to the shareholders, but in essence, they cut their costs to the bone. So what is discretionary may or may not be discretionary in terms of the future of the business. It may mean that the business doesn't expand. We don't come out with new products. It could mean all sorts of things. And this is the thing that people start when we get big inflationary numbers, they start to think about what it is that we do. And what in essence happens is that if they start cutting all these things, other businesses start to lose their revenue. And this becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that all businesses start to become affected, some because they won't spend, others because they have no money to spend anymore because their income has been cut. I mean, just think about the coffee shop where no one comes in for their morning coffee. What do?
Panic.
And that's exactly it. They can only hold and keep the business going for a certain amount of time. And yes, with some businesses, there is some fat in it. And yes, you can try and put down the cup of price of coffee. You can offer free donuts. You could do all sorts of things to attract people, but all it does is means that your overheads go up and your business profits go down. You can only do it for a certain amount of time before you go out of business.
Well, it depends on what the root cause is. If it's because some Joe opened up next door and he's undercutting you, you know, you need to tackle the root cause head on as opposed to, any old strategy.
I quite agree. And I mean, there are lots of pressures on business. It doesn't necessarily just mean inflation, but would somebody else open up a new coffee shop during a period of high inflation? Risky strategy, people. Risky strategy.
Well, it's supply demand, Peter. That's what it comes down to. And if there's huge demand, of course you're going to have people who are going to take the opportunity and try to make a buck out of it.
Yes, and I will get to that, Michael, because it's a very important point to think about in terms of inflation. Now, what would you, and now I must admit, during the current inflation, there isn't much I've actually cut down on. I have tried to cut down on my travel expense in my car by not making as many trips as we were making. When it cost me, my friend Ralph Ortmans wanted me to, he bought something on Gumtree and wanted me to pick it up, it was in a neighbouring suburb, and drive it up to him. It cost me $50 to drive it up to him. Now, the fact that I was going up into the district for another reason anyway, it didn't matter here nor there. But, I mean, when you have to pay that kind of price on, say, a $30 item, $50 worth of diesel, it does seem rather stupid. So what do you reduce your spending on? Anyone got thoughts?
Well, the stuff that doesn't make you money if you're a business.
Maybe. I mean, coming out with a new product line, you're speculating.
It's speculation.
Um,
There's risk attached there. It may work, but
Aha.
it may also fail.
Now you're getting down to the nub of it. This is what it's about. The issue is about what risk you're prepared to take.
Mhm.
The whole point of it is this.
You
If you stop buying food,
die.
yeah, well, there's a chance you'll starve to death. Yep. If you don't pay your electricity bill, you could freeze to death.
Yes.
And catch cold like Ian Searle.
Yeah.
Very well timed there, Ian.
Well,
Yes, it was clever, wasn't it?
This was
and-
my devotion
and-
to my dearly beloved that caused this.
Yes, well, you can blame anyone, Ian, anyone you like. And she can blame somebody else as well. So
She can,
it
yes,
goes on and on.
And did.
The blame game is lovely. Plays it. I do it. I'll be honest. So the whole point about it is it comes down to how much risk you're about or want to take, what you will cut your spending on. I mean, if my car now's done 205,000 kilometres, I'm very proud of my car doing that. And the only problem is why I haven't bought a new one sooner is I kind of like my old one, and they haven't got anything to replace it. It really is a worry. But the risk is I am at little risk of it not working. I keep the damn thing maintained. So is it an excess that I buy a new car? Or am I justified because the cost of running an older car is more? Am I justified because at my age I deserve more comfort? On what basis can I justify the spend? And this is what business starts to think about. On what basis? There are things that I know I've got a risk on and I need to spend the money. Absolutely no issue with that. If I needed tax advice because dear, oh dear, Ian, I think I'm going to have to come and put you down.
We'll get the shotgun from out the back.
Well, the only problem with that is I'm such a lousy shot now. I'm sure to only damage your house.
You damage your window.
Well, it's possible I could shoot myself in the foot as well, so we won't do it. Okay. Now, I want to talk about this on an individual basis. The potential to find work. Now, the government, I think this was the state government of Victoria, was talking tonight of laying off 6,000 people. We all know they've been spending like a man with no arms. I don't know how a man with no arms spends, but that's what the adage is. Throwing the money up in the air or letting it blow away in the wind or whatever they do. But now they've found, oh shit, we need to get the budget back into, well, moving towards the black. I don't think they're going to get it to the black immediately. So they're going to cut 6,000 jobs. Now, if interest rates...
Ian, do you want to go on silent?
I can go
Please?
silent. Okay, I'll mute.
I think it's a fair enough suggestion.
request. Thank you, Moz.
You can actually go through the motions, Ian. We'll be with you in spirit.
Yes, and we'll ask you a question. You can come back. Okay, some businesses are not affected by inflation. Anyone got any thoughts? Who? No?
Not affected by inflation.
Well, they are, but it's not really strong. The
Public
government,
Yeah, I was going to
Pub-
say government, but it just means that they can't spend as much or they can't
yeah, they
borrow as much.
they put their taxes up to cover it.
Hang on, how many since the inception of the GST, Peter? How many tax increases have there been?
How would I know? I'm not an economist.
Zero. It's always been 10% since it got introduced. What, 20 years ago or thereabouts?
Yeah, but mate, you think that's the only tax?
No, of course not. There's plenty of other taxes around there. I mean, look, to the point where Vita was talking about with house prices, the governments have kept the amount of stamp duty on a house consistent. So on your $23,000, 70 years ago, you would have paid maybe a few $100 stamp duty at the same percentage. The guy that bought that $2.5 million block of land probably paid $80,000 worth of stamp duty.
And what a deserving cause he was. Okay.
Actually, Peter, one of the
Yeah.
I was going to have that question earlier around when you were talking about the government's printing money, because I mean, to some extent, during the pandemic, where every government was, literally handing out money hand over
Correct.
fist to keep the economy going, a lot of them also did, the so-called quantitative easing. In other words, they just printed more
They
money.
printed
right?
money.
And originally, like you sort of mentioned that at the time, a country takes a risk that by just printing extra money, they're going to devalue their currency. But when everybody does it at the same time, I mean, we saw, and the worst offender was probably the USA, was probably printing
Correct.
more money, and they saw the value of the US dollar go up over the period, so they weren't punished for it at all. But
Yeah,
so
well,
I mean, how does that fit in? You're just printing more
Okay.
money.
They're in a unique position. And the unique position they're in is they are one of the three great economic powers, and they've got more levers to pull.
And also their currency is almost the de facto global currency, right?
Correct. And the other side of it is that they're largely, and I may be wrong with this, but they're largely self-sufficient in goods. They have plenty of oil. They have plenty of gas. They've got most natural resources. And they could probably, they're not easily affected. The only thing that affects them is whether some of their export markets go down. But their economy is so big that it can be, at least for a period of time, self-supporting.
Well, my question on this really comes down to, the other impact of people printing money. They were predicting if they print money, it's just going to increase inflation, because effectively the government's giving, the government giving handouts could create spending, which can create inflation, is the theory. But we sort of weren't seeing that either, except now that inflation's going up. Is that a sort of delayed response to all the government spending? Or is it because of, our friend Vladimir, starting a war and creating an oil crisis?
Well, no, it's a combination of events.
Right.
And one exacerbates the other. And you look about, I do not believe, I absolutely do not believe we have the supply chain problems that people made up. I believe when somebody says to me, oh, it's supply chain problems, I don't believe them. I believe if you really wanted the stuff, you could get it.
Peter, you just quoted the USA is self-sufficient because it has plenty of supply of oil, gas, and minerals, right? Now, another country has plenty of those same three resources, but it's outlawing two of them, and that's this country.
Yes. It's
so
kind of.
the fact that
I do not understand governments, Moz.
The fact that you're patting America on the back for being self-sufficient and in a good place, the country you live in is doing of its own volition moving away from that self-sufficiency?
Well, we aren't self-sufficient
on.
in oil.
You just quoted the 3 items, and I'm just quoting them back as the criteria for what I just said.
Yeah, no, and I
Oil,
understand
mineral,
what
hang
you're
on,
saying.
but we export. We're self-sufficient in minerals. We export. We're a net exporter of minerals.
Yeah, that's
We're not
one of
an
them.
exporter of oil. What was the other
Gas.
item?
Yes.
Gas, oil, and
Oh,
minerals.
oil and gas
Alan.
go together.
All the things that have been the subject of your life's career.
Indeed.
Well, hang on. Okay. Let's look at the gas. It's a good example of inflation, right? In the West Coast, we have a West Australian government that has pressured the gas companies. If they want to avoid having extra royalties, they have to spend more. They have to reserve a certain amount of their gas for domestic production. So we've now got gas pipelines from the Northwest Shelf down to Perth and to the Pilbara, and they've built in effect quite a gas economy in WA as a result. On the East Coast, we've vastly expanded our gas exports through the LNG projects in Queensland, and not just that was there none of that reserved for domestic use, but because they all underestimated their reserve, they're actually draining gas that might otherwise have gone for domestic purposes is going into these long-term LNG contracts. So we have a shortage of gas on the East Coast because we've also got declining reserves in Bass Strait, our major supply. So we're getting big gas prices. You know, simply, you could say I blame the government, but I blame the government for not actually properly governing these companies and just letting them, you know, export it all on 20, 30-year contracts at very cheap prices that are fixed. And guess what? We get nothing for it. In fact, what we get is higher gas prices for it.
Correct.
And I have a reason to whinge to prove it is because, well, guess what? They don't do like that in WA.
That's what I said, was that we have plenty of oil, gas, and minerals. We have it. That's how we govern.
Now, hang on, we have plenty of oil, but I'm missing the point. I mean, Peter was originally making a point about being self-sufficient in what you use in your own country. You know,
the USA.
You know,
Yeah,
I'm saying we have a shortage of gas because we're exporting it rather than using it domestically. So that's artificially created. So the domestic, right? So it's just domestic supply we're talking about here. So domestic supply, we have enough minerals for what because we don't actually manufacture much out of the minerals we mine, but the little we do manufacture in terms of smelting, we are self-sufficient. You know, we can run aluminium smelters off Australian bauxite, no problem. We've got plenty of bauxite. We can run our steel mills that we have off Australian iron ore, which we do. You know, so we're still
that's all.
So for domestic purpose, now back to the inflation thing. For domestic purposes, we are more or less self-sufficient over time in those commodities. But they're not but we import the hell out of almost everything else we use.
I just said those 3.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's move on.
No, I'm not. I'm saying we are self-sufficient in those things.
Yeah,
we produce more than we need to use. Other than the gas example I gave you, we are self-sufficient in those minerals, more so than the North America is. North America doesn't have much iron ore.
The countries that don't have gas, oil, and minerals don't have them. We're one of the countries like the example that Peter gave of the USA that does have them. Simple, what you have and what you don't have. We've got them here.
Missing the point. Self-sufficiency. We're talking about self-sufficiency.
Our borders.
We're talking about
the problem is, and what Colin's trying to say is that government policy has failed us because we're paying shitloads more, even though we are self-sufficient in terms of what it should be. Now, you know, over there in the Western Australia, they actually did the right thing and have actually got it to the point where they need to supply a certain amount to the Western Australian market before they can actually export it to anywhere else in the world and make, you know, barrels of money out of it, so to speak.
And by the way, it's excessive. There's no political issue here. It's successive governments of both types that have been on the East Coast encouraging maximum development of these resources for very little domestic gain. But I return to the point, which, sorry, we've distracted on it, Peter, when you were talking about self-sufficiency and you were saying this supply chain problem is not as bad as people say. It all comes down to how much are you self-sufficient in the goods and services that you use yourself, right? And we do import a lot, but it's finished goods we import, and we export raw commodities.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, it brings me
Agreed.
to my next point, people, which is, what is the one single thing, in my opinion, this is my opinion, that causes the greatest amount of stress? And it's simple in my mind, it's the global economy.
Mm-hmm.
In essence, if we lived in Australia and we worked on the barter system, so that I give you some consulting advice and you give me 3 bananas, it's probably 2 more than I deserve.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Yep, I'm happy with that. But I'm happy to take the 3 and ask for 5. But in essence, we are now subject to this thing they call the global economy. When America sneezes, we catch cold. When
That's what it's about.
Europe has
I must have been to
problems,
America.
hey?
I must have been to America.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's
well,
why you got cold.
clearly.
I caught cold. Yeah.
Clearly, we also are affected by Europe. We're affected by Mr. Putin in Russia. We're affected by China. We signed up to this, and the resultant inflation because of these overseas pressures is foisted upon us, and we are largely powerless to control it. We are, in most cases, price takers, not price givers. Even our iron ore, I believe we sell too cheaply. Clearly, we sell our gas too cheaply. Clearly, many of our raw materials other people want, we are dudded. I believe even our primary production works against us. Have any of you noticed the price of beef lately? No?
No, not particularly.
Most of you don't
Yes.
shop. Yes,
Yes,
good
very
work.
expensive. Very
Thank you.
expensive.
And
The
you know,
supermarket, Peter, it's pretty lamb and beef. I've noticed.
it's
'cause
the
I
same.
did
It's
the
all
shopping.
tied up with the same moss.
They've stayed the same.
Who? They have.
Supermarkets. Yeah, beef
Yeah, well,
and lamb.
again, what I'm telling you is this. About 6 months ago, I haven't been selling cattle for quite a long time. But my friend Ralph sold cattle 6 months ago, and he got the most amazing prices. I mean, I was selling, when I was selling beef, I was getting, I don't know, $1,500 an animal. He got nearly $4,000 to $5,000 an animal.
Jeez.
Why? Because that was the price they would get. He was getting the price that the people overseas were prepared to pay. So even our food prices are somewhat driven, I'm not going to say totally, but somewhat driven by what people will pay overseas. And this increases inflation. It can do nothing else because the price of the goods is well above what it costs to produce, well above what you consider reasonable profit, well above what you reasonably could expect. So the whole damn thing is, once you start to get into this spiral, it means that people buy less beef. I mean, I used to like to go to supermarket and buy a crayfish. When I look at my fishmonger and he's sitting there and he's got small crayfish and it's $100, I figure, God, I'd rather drop a line in the ocean and see if I could catch one.
Need a cray pot, not a line.
I know. Thanks, Ian. No wonder I've been.
My advice, unlike yours, is
Yeah.
free.
And just to
I
add to
No
wonder,
that,
wonder
Peter,
I've been unsuccessful.
you might be
Yeah.
missing the point. It's actually not a fish, Peter.
It's a
crustacean.
It's a crustacean. Yes. Thanks for telling me, as if I didn't know. Okay.
Peter,
So-
just one, can I ask a question? That huge increase you just mentioned about the price of an animal or the sell price of an animal,
Yep.
that would be going to an export market, would it? And if
No,
if,
not
if I
necessarily.
notice our prices are not going up yet in the supermarket for beef and lamb, which I have noticed, by the kilo, does that mean, we're buying, let's say a lesser grade cut or animal than what Ralph might get, because his animal might be headed overseas, something
Well,
like that.
he
A
sells.
different market, in other words.
Yeah. He sells in a general market, and that general market serves a number of areas. Let me try and explain that. There is the restockers. So they'll buy Ralph's animal and grow it on. There is the export market, and yep, he's sold to that, and so have I. And there's the domestic market. But the whole point is the same people are bidding for the same animal.
Yeah.
So in essence, at the sale yard, you will have all these groups, each competing for the same resource. And the fact that eventually Ralph is no fool. He will sell to the highest bidder, or at least his agent does, to make as much money as he can for himself, as much as Ralph. They all get a cut of the bloody thing as it goes. So the issue comes down to, it can't do anything else. If people are offering you 5,000 and you really want to buy it at 1,200, and if they're only on offer and they're worth 5,000, you pay 5,000. It doesn't matter. Now, there are sale yards that are strictly for domestic animals. They only work on the domestic market. That's true. Big supermarkets like Coles and Woolworths, guess what they do? They have contracts with growers.
Yep.
So they don't go to the market particularly. They go to the farmer and they create a contract with the farmer, and that contract may last 2 or 3 years, and they give him a price for 2 or 3 years.
Yes.
These are some of the reasons why you get some of the differences.
And the export market would, they'd be buying the best animals, right? Which, like which is a rarer commodity than, say, an average animal, right? So it is possible that the price of an exceptional animal multiplied by hundreds or thousands of those animals could go up. Its inflation rate could go up much, much higher rate than the average domestic market lot of animals. I'm thinking, because that's what happens with housing stock too.
And look, part of it. Yeah,
can I add to that, Peter? Because I was just looking up the data on beef, and I've got the world chart, and beef doubled in price about mid-2019 to 2022. So in 3 years, it more than doubled, like 140%. It went up. The global price, right? It's now eased off. Since then, it's eased off by about 10%. So it's going down now, but it was going up. So that's the global price. So to the point that Morris is making, if you've got an export market that's the price of beef's going up, then surely the domestic market has to reflect that. Yes, otherwise, people are going to buy the domestic animals cheap and go and, across the road to the other market that sells it for export.
Yeah, but if they're on contract, that doesn't work because.
I think the supermarket points. Yeah, that's a good point about the supermarkets.
And that's what I was quoting, the supermarket prices, because that's where I've noticed the price hadn't been going up.
Because they got locked in contracts is the answer to that. But that means they will go up, right? The next time they do a contract, the farmer's going to ask for more money, right?
Yeah.
That's that's not true. Like I buy mince from the supermarket. It used to be $5, then it went to $5.50, $6.80. Now it's above $10. So that's more than double, and it hasn't come down in a long time. It won't come down for a long time, if it will come down.
And that's the whole point. Will it come down?
Yeah, quite often.
This is the issue of locking in prices. What might happen is they might not go up for a while now. The question is, will they actually go down?
Yeah.
And we know there is an issue called supply and demand.
Yep.
And that's what creates markets. It always has. But the whole point about it is, will you put your prices down if the demand goes down and the supply goes up? At the moment, and it's strange, there is probably a reasonable supply of animals, though the floods up in the north have caused some issues with the markets. I mean, I know about the beef market because I'm supposedly in it. I keep calling myself a farmer, but what we have are plastic cows that just sit there and happily look at the grass. So I'm not really selling at the moment, but the issue comes down to there are other things that will affect the market, and there are other things that will affect supply and demand. So again, the issue comes down to, will the $10 a kilo for mince go down, or will it just not go up for a while when inflation eases? These are questions that really are difficult to answer. Will they want to retain the profit that they're making now, or will they say, if I lower the price, I'll increase the demand and I'll sell more? Always something that I have had an interest in is, do you sell on volume and make profit on volume, or do you sell on scarcity and make money on scarcity? This is the two things that you can do. And the question comes down to, it probably depends on the item you are selling, whether it's commodity or whether it's a scarcity item. This is how the theory of price point works. The greater the scarcity, the greater price point that you can ask for. That's what happens. Okay,
Peter,
I did want
Peter,
to
on
talk.
that note, Peter, there could be a big disruptor coming in this lucky country called Australia, in that I'm just hearing from my local buddies here in the bush that we've got plague proportions of deer, wild
Correct.
pig, and of course kangaroo. So so that's plenty of available fresh meat, for people who want to eat meat in our country without having to go and source it from other places, if we change or cull or utilize that stock of readily available meat. I know it would mean some changes to industries and laws and all that sort of thing.
Correct.
But it's a potential disruptor to, if there becomes that scarcity situation you're talking about.
Yeah, well, and again, you are right. There are alternatives that people can do. It's not quite as bad as during the French Revolution, saying the people are out of bread, so let them eat cake. It isn't.
She never
quite
said that. She never said that.
What were her exact
Were you
words,
there,
Ian?
Ian?
I'm a historian.
What did she say
Okay.
exactly?
I'll
Marie
take your
Antoinette.
word for it, buddy. I'll take your word for it.
It's an
I
urban
did
myth.
want to move on. I did want to move on to money. Now, money's an interesting thing. You never seem to have enough of it when you want it, and when you don't need it, you seem to have enough. Which has always bemused me. Why do you have all this money at retirement, which would have been nicer when you were starting out? I think we should live our lives backwards. And on the day of your death, your last 10 cents evaporates in front of you.
Very difficult
Wouldn't
to
that be
manage,
nice?
I've discovered.
Hey,
It's very difficult to manage.
it certainly is. Well, let me talk a little bit about it. The whole thing about mortgages at the moment. Unfortunately, I don't have one. I'm very happy about that.
So am I.
I spent an inordinate amount of time paying mine off as quickly as I possibly could. It just made sense to do so. And then you don't go through a lot of these problems. But the kids nowadays don't have that luxury. And they have to keep refinancing, and they are out to the vagaries of whatever's happening in interest rates that exist at the time, and whether they're fixed, if they can get it, or they're variable, what's kind of the best way to go. And the issue about the control of money policy in this country is largely down to the cost that the banks have themselves to get money. And this is obviously largely controlled by the Reserve Bank, who tells them what they can buy money from the country for. This is called, I think, the bank bill rate, which is the cost of money to the banks. Now, the banks really don't worry about that a lot, because they do take a fair bit of risk of people going broke and not being able to complete their mortgages, but they have these wonderful things over people's mortgages, so they sell them up and nearly probably recoup all the money they lost anyway, so they don't worry about it at a particular point. But the whole point is, how many people are losing money on their houses? If the value of housing starts to go down, and it has, the question is, how far will it go? And all those people that have these mortgages that maybe because of inflation now struggle to pay or eat, they have to sell their property, and they find that the money that they had in their house is no longer the same amount of money, and they lose money. This becomes yet another wonderful thing that inflation causes. This movement in prices both up and down in the marketplace. It's not just about prices going up, it's also about prices going down.
Yeah, but Peter, there's the old adage that says never be a forced seller. And if you are in that situation, unfortunate situation where you can't make repayments and you have a fire sale, you're really throwing yourself to the mercy of the market to say what it's valued at. And look, my brother-in-law is a stockbroker, and he always he recommends his clients sell when the shares go much higher. Nobody wants to sell because they want to see how much higher it goes. And as soon as the market or the ass falls out of the market, everyone's ringing him up asking him to sell, and they're willing to make a loss. So go figure.
Yeah, well, you and I both know that we would never get ourselves in that trouble, except if we lost our job tomorrow.
Which is possibility.
And I mean, this is the whole issue. I mean, I paid mine off as quick as I could to reduce whatever risks we had. And fortunately, I lived in a time where wages went up, and my skills were in demand, and all the other good things that I should be grateful for, and I truly am. But the whole thing is, again, are you a price giver or a price taker in terms of how the market is? And that's particularly how it looks. So it brings me to the point of, is inflation all bad?
No. Served me well enough.
I think the problem, Peter, I think your original definition of it I had a bit of trouble with, in the sense that I always treated inflation as the price of goods or commodities that are otherwise unchanging. You know, it's like the same good, like we talked about a cup of coffee that's more or less the same, then you can talk about that. But a lot of what you were talking about, what was good about inflation is people making profits. But a lot of profit is made by creating new products or value adding to existing products. I don't call that inflation. I mean,
no, it's not.
Yeah,
it's not. And again, the question of whether it creates demand, which creates inflation, is still got to be part of the argument. But what you're saying is, I see that as a necessary ingredient to the growth of the country, the growth of the world. Creating new products creates its own demand and creates additional opportunity, and it creates all sorts of benefits, as well as it creates the potential for people to make money. Whether it becomes inflationary because of demand, it's hard to know. But let me go on a little bit further about it.
Peter, can I just ask a question?
Of course, Colin.
Isn't inflation caused by the disparity between supply and demand?
That's one of the areas, Colin. It's not. It's only there are three major areas, and that's one of them.
So I must have missed some stuff earlier on then.
You did. There are three of them, which are the major causes. I'll send you all out the notes and you can read them.
Sure.
But they're marginally different in how they operate. I mean, the whole point about the availability of money in the world has the effect of causing inflation as well.
But money is also just another
it's just supply
commodity.
And demand. It's supply and demand of money.
Yeah, so it's the same thing.
It's that as well. But a natural disaster, such as Mr. Putin, or
that's an unnatural disaster.
Well,
yeah, I reckon that's right. Well, worldwide drought, worldwide floods.
But that still comes under supply and demand, because you don't have ability to supply.
Yes. Anyway, read the notes and look it up. Okay.
Well, I don't see any three. I see only one.
Well, that's fine.
Okay.
You read The Economists. I read them, and that's what they told me.
Okay.
Not that I trust economists as far as I can spare it, but in essence,
That's what they said.
They must have a point somewhere.
Yeah, but one of the things you're adding there, Colin, is you're saying that supply and demand, therefore the whole quantitative easing thing could be talked about as the supply of money itself.
Yes,
you can increase inflation by printing more money, creating additional supply of money will make inflation go up. Supposedly, that's the theory.
Correct.
But it's not a perfect market, and a lot of the economy stuff is predicated on a perfect market. And there's no such thing as a perfect market. So you've got to be careful how you apply those theorems.
Well, that was the same thing about when I think your point, Peter, about the supply chain constraints that in effect does affect the supply side of the equation and perhaps the demand side, depending on where you're selling your goods. But, during the pandemic, the problem we had on shortages was that everybody in the world was having shortages of common things like PPE and, ventilators and the whole thing that we panicked over. And it was genuinely hard to increase the supply of that when everybody's looking for it at once.
Correct. Yep. All right, let me move on to this. The question is, what should you invest in a time of high inflation? And I'll also talk about the type of work you should be looking for. And this affects people in their own consulting business. Let me deal with that first. In essence, what should you do to protect yourself in your job in times of high inflation.
Be a revenue generating asset.
Excellent. Another thought? How about the type of companies that you actually work for? Let's
High demand companies, I guess. Companies
Yeah,
that are in high demand.
well,
Government, education, hospitals, they're all good jobs in
why?
because
You're
they're
right.
always in
Why?
they're always in demand. They're always in demand. People are always going to need doctors, so you need medical. Government's always going to need people to run it. Education, can't stop education. There's what else was there? There's a few more actually. I can't think of them.
But health,
Gambling, gambling industry, that always tends to do well, especially during a recession.
That's desperation.
Yeah, no, that's taking bad chances. Yeah.
But yeah, you're quite right, Vita.
Thank you.
The things like as I talked about earlier, Mr. Maslow's food, clothing, sex, and shelter are things that people need, and people have got to fulfill their basic needs. Now, yeah, they might not be able to afford their house, but they've at least got to be able to rent something. Or else move into a tent on the Yarra Bank, which I'm told is full up at this point in time. But in real terms, there are industries that are less affected. I'm not going to say they're not affected, but less affected by inflation because their demand is constant.
Inflexible demand.
Yeah.
Banking.
Well, banking is peculiar. I believe banking is a lagging thing. People in bad times will spend less and I assume some of it they will put in the bank for a rainy day. So the banks may end up with more funds in them for a short period of time. And yes, if people aren't asking for mortgages because they're afraid they can't pay for them, banks may be affected over the longer period of time. It's one of those things that are quite tricky. Now, do we need banks?
Well, the government wants them to be around.
Well, it depends.
Yeah, they sort of do, but they make them pay for the privilege of being around.
They do.
Yeah, and they're also the official financial record of our economy.
Yeah, to some extent, maybe.
Well, they can tell you what people spend their money on, and that's why banks. I think you made a comment about one of the ANZ banks not accepting cash anymore.
Yep.
Banks absolutely hate cash because it costs them money, and they can't track people.
That's right.
Well, no. The other side of it was that if they get them to pay on plastic, there is a surcharge.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Clicking the ticket.
And think of our credit union, or now it's called, what is the Australian Unity? It doesn't exist anymore. There's no building for it. It just, everything is run from someone's home, I think.
Yep. Let me.
So is there an answer to, do we need banks, or avoid that?
I think we've got to have them. We've got to have somewhere where you can exchange. I'm trying not to say money. Where we can exchange funds.
Value.
Well,
Crypto.
Translate.
Yes, I know.
Transact value. Some mechanism to transact value. You're saying?
Yeah. Well, I try not to use the word value either, but yes, it's somewhere where we can transact. I think that's fine to leave it like that. The whole thing is there's got to be some backing to it, and this is what worries me about crypto. Truly does. It is so volatile.
Yeah.
That where's the backing?
Yep.
Well, there are cryptocurrencies that basically are tied to real currencies.
Well, if that's true, that's nice. But I mean, this is the whole thing, and let me get to that because I think it's important to think about. I'm sure you all read about Credit Suisse.
Yes.
They've been going bad for a long time, people. It wasn't just whatever inflation did to them. They've made just horrible, bad decisions on what they invest in, and they were already on the chopping block. It just things got worse and moved them along faster. But here's something that's quite interesting. Do any of you people have notes with banks? I'm thinking of things like pearls with Commonwealth Bank.
No.
I've come across them, but I've not got any. No.
Well, I do. And I was having a discuss with a friend about it, and he told me that Credit Suisse has actually been sold off. And I forgot, UBS or something, UTS, whatever they are. Who cares? And the thing that they will not honour is
the credit notes.
These people will not get anything. Are the people that have got the shareholders will get money, but these people that have got these secondary credit devices with the bank will get zippo, and billions and billions and billions have disappeared down the gurgler because Credit Suisse has gone broke. Now, this then says to me, in these kind of times, where should you put your money? One of the good things that's interesting about inflation to know is, and truly it doesn't travel at the same speed as your mortgage going up, but your interest at the bank actually could go up too. Not necessarily though, I think, but it could. So the question is that safe? And yes, in Australia, bank deposits are guaranteed, but not the secondary credit documents. You take a greater risk. So,
and there's also a limit on the amounts that they guarantee on bank deposits. I think it's $250,000 if memory serves me correct.
It's something like that, Michael. I have forgotten the number too, but there is a limit. So you won't be totally down the tubes, but it is unlikely because of the bank guarantee that all Australian banks have to pay into, that they will go down the gurgler. The federal government guarantees a certain level with them. That's not to say they won't. It's just that there is a guarantee with it that protects it. These are not the case in overseas banks. There is no such mechanisms in many countries to do this. So in some ways, we've been quite prudential in the way that we've looked after that. Now, we've already noted, and this is tricky because a lot of businesses failed because of COVID, and a lot of them are still in the process of failing because they haven't recovered from COVID. So is inflation causing a lot of businesses now to go broke, or will it force businesses to go broke, or is it an accumulation of things that have gone on for a long time? Tricky to think about it. Now,
I think a lot of it is also the temporal effect, Peter, because certain things come through, and the news and the current affairs shows have been actually quite, I guess, giving all of us visibility in the fact that small businesses their energy prices have gone through the roof.
Correct.
And this has happened very, very suddenly. So, if a pizza place is now paying, I don't know, $70,000, $80,000 in energy bills to heat their oven and do whatever they need to do there, it's a matter of time until we're paying $30 or $40 for a pizza,
and
for us
how
to be
many
able
would
to
you buy?
survive. Well,
Yeah.
you wouldn't be buying too many of them at $30, $40, and that's what I'm talking about now. Who knows? In 10 years' time, that could be the norm.
Well, it's possible. And this is what inflation does. Does it create a plateau, which is the new plateau, or do you go down to the old plateau? And I still don't remember, in the inflation that I've been through in my lifetime, I don't remember anything going back particularly to the old plateau.
Yeah,
I may be wrong.
Right.
And
I
I'm
think-
with
I
you
think
there.
you're right.
The only thing I've ever seen go backwards, I don't know if you remember when they had Hurricane Larry or whatever it was, the
Yep.
bananas.
Oh, the
went to $10.
bananas. Yeah,
That-
that's a
that-
good example.
But that wasn't really inflation. That was like a force majeure, like
Yep.
act
It's
of God.
supply and demand.
Yes,
Yeah.
supply demand temporarily, But other than that, I've just seen house skyrocket, everything else skyrocket.
And this again, you need to start to think about in terms of what you invest in.
And
The
the only
question-
thing that's kind of never really kind of kept up with inflation, probably are PCs, computer stuff, maybe because so many people are buying them and they've been able to keep the price down.
Well, I'm trying to buy one for the Orchid Club at the moment. Thank you, Michael Dukakis, for your help. It was bemusing to me. I put the figures to the president and the vice president, who said that how could I possibly buy a laptop for $500? And I said, well, if you give me a suggestion that I need to keep the prices down, what did you want me to do? Put in $1,500 for a laptop? Again, you get what you pay for. The whole thing is, there are laptops and there are laptops.
But I remember rolling out ThinkPads to the executives of BHP, that there were 14,000 and 17,000. Well, that's unheard of these days. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, no, it's quite right. The cost of technology goes down because the volume increases.
Yeah, everyone's
it's all about, and making cars, and electric cars will come down too. And they will come down because the cost of components will come down. Therefore, the car will come down because as they make more of them, the parts will become more readily available, and you get economy of scale in terms of your manufacture starts to work into it. Now,
unless your supply is not quite going to provide that
and you're
much.
right. I mean, the supply of car chips during COVID was a real problem, and the cost of cars. And weirdly, the cost of second-hand cars went up because people couldn't buy new cars.
Yep.
And
I know.
I heard a number of people that paid more than the new price for a model for one that was 5 years old.
Yep.
And I'm
Amazing.
thinking, you're nuts.
Well, they wanted another car, or they wanted a new
that
car.
was what it was.
Yep, exactly. That's supply and demand again. But one of the other things that I'm not sure whether you're aware of, is because of the war in Ukraine, there's a shortage of neon.
No.
And neon is essential to lithography to make chips. And the consequence is we're going to have a long-term shortage of that.
Can't we mine it from the poles where it's all gone as gases? Can't we just take a rocket ship up and collect it and bring it down to Earth?
The two major factories were in the Ukraine,
right?
And they were destroyed.
Wow. So somebody needs to build one.
Where's the
Okay.
raw product? Where's the raw product at the moment?
The raw product basically comes from fractionating liquid nitrogen.
Thanks, Colin. I didn't know that.
Yeah, Ukraine has half of the world's neon production. Wow.
Do we have any neon here in Australia?
And if you want to hear more about the doom and gloom, listen to Peter Zian. And he's predicting a long-term inflationary situation.
And I think that that's exactly the way I see it, Colin. I believe that because of the global factors, not local factors, because of global factors, this inflationary cycle will last longer than people think it will.
And the only way out of it is actually to address our local ability to manufacture and to produce products locally, because you're not going to be able to rely on, as long as there's war looming in that space, you're not going to be able to rely on even us handling climate change or any of the transitions that we need.
Thank you for the gloom and doom,
Sorry.
Colin.
Look,
would anyone
look-
like the use of a sharp knife now?
no,
Well,
no,
the good
look
news,
at
the good news, Colin, is Taiwan is rapidly ramping up its neon production. The bad
Right.
news is that China might invade Taiwan.
I have no doubt. I have no doubt that China will take over Taiwan in the next number of years.
But
Um,
also look at the positive side. Look for stocks that do neons and watch them go sky high, invest in them and make heaps of money.
And that was what my next point was about. Thank you, Vita. What are the businesses that one should be investing in? Some of the things that we've considered staples may no longer be the safest investments. And some of the things that we considered risky may be the safer places for us to invest going forward. So these are the things that inflation makes us think about. And what the whole reason for my talk tonight was just to get people thinking about what will change, what do we need to do about it, is there opportunity there that we can take, is there things that we should protect ourselves against as best we can. We should all be growing our own vegetables. I'm convinced of that.
Yeah.
I'm happy to grow some beef for you all, but you won't want to pay my prices. But
No.
all these kind of things are what change brings. And you need to think about the change and think about the positive and the negative aspects to help you make any decisions going forward. Did anyone else want to contribute anything? I'm done.
Thank you.
Look around for specials, because it just,
Yeah.
there's so many of them around compared to what people might be used to paying or think they have to pay. But if you do a bit of research, you can get things that you want for your life at special prices without paying whatever contributes to the inflation figure as gauged by government or agencies or whatever, where they have the basket of products that tells them what the inflation rate is. Well, go and get cheaper products that go in that basket than the ones that somebody picks out from the government to calculate an inflation rate. It's possible.
There are alternatives, Morris.
Yes,
That is
yes,
absolutely
Peter.
true.
Yep.
Well, gentlemen, I
And lady.
am wanting a speaker for next month, please, people.